Today, we have the honor to have with us today Dr. Richard Matsuishi of the Japanese American Citizens League, and he's going to talk about the vital importance of Executive Order 9066. Thank you.
One of the most extraordinary episodes in the United States was the establishment of concentration camps that involved Americans of Japanese ancestry. And there were about 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry. So over 70% were citizens of the United States. The other ones were here legally. There were 10 camps throughout the United States, 2 in Arkansas. This gentleman here was in Minidoka, Idaho, and I was in Poston, Arizona, which is outside of Parker. And the 2 camps, the one in Parker and in Poston, had about 18 to 20,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, and Gila River, which is right here by Sakatone, had about 16 to 17,000. There were two different camps here in that area, and Poston had 3 camps. During that time, Poston, Arizona was the 3rd largest populated area outside of Phoenix and Tucson. You know, one of the things that happened was that the government's policy was based on the notion that the Japanese had to be regarded disloyal just because of their ancestry. That the indication was General John DeWitt was one of the ones that coined the term, a Jap is a Jap. One of the things too was leading up to this, I think part of it, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is that the resentment against the people of Japanese ancestry was pretty high in the California area, especially the West Coast, and it was a resentment that built up, and the bombing of Pearl Harbor gave them an opportunity to act against the people of Japanese ancestry. One of the things that I think you probably all know who Senator Sam Ervin was in the Watergate era. He indicated that this was probably the worst decision that was ever made by the Supreme Court of the United States. And you know, as an aside, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Errol Warren at the time was the Attorney General of California, and he was for the removal of the Japanese Americans. And in his memoirs, he indicated that that was one of the things he resented the most, that's his part in the removal of the Japanese Americans. The other thing, if you remember, Pearl Harbor was in Hawaii, and the islands of Hawaii were mostly people of Japanese ancestry. So why didn't they remove them? Can you imagine that the economy would go kaput because the economy runs on the people that lived on the island? And if you took over 2/3 of those people, where would you put them, and how would the economy survive? So there was only one camp in Hawaii, Honolulu, and they had about 2,000 people in it. You know, the order was supposedly supposed to include also the other countries that we were at war with, Italy and Germany, but they were under surveillance for a long period of time, so the FBI and the naval intelligence people had them under surveillance. So when the war broke out, the people that were under surveillance were actually either put away or scrutinized a little bit more. And as far as sabotage, the only incidents of sabotage that was ever occurred by for Japan were 10 people. All 10 were Caucasian. You know, if you're Japan and you're wise, are you going to hire somebody that looks like the enemy to do your sabotage for you? No. Yeah, and Executive Order 9066 was signed on February 19th, 1942, and by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and I think that's one of the worst things he ever did, although he did quite a few good things. You don't hear this very much in school books and textbooks in high school. In fact, in high school, I don't remember anything reading about it, right? And now, as I go to talk to some of the high school students, they may have one page indicating what occurred at that time. The interesting thing was Attorney General Francis Biddle at the time indicated to President Roosevelt, hey, this is unconstitutional. You can't do this. And the powers that be overrode Attorney Biddle. One of the things that was really interesting too was that the government was used to using euphemisms. They didn't call them concentration camps, but the definition of a concentration camp is putting people behind prison walls or barbed wire. And it's the euphemism they used was relocation or internment centers. And to make it more palatable to the people that were incarcerated, the government indicated that these people we were incarcerating were aliens and non-aliens. What's a non-alien? Non-alien is a citizen. It was very hectic because after Pearl Harbor and after the executive order, people of Japanese ancestry usually had approximately 2 to 3 weeks to sell everything they have or get rid of everything, and all they could take to the camp were things that they carry on their back, duffel bags, suitcases. The order authorized the military to set up a sector, military sector, where people would be excluded. And that was the Western Defense Command under General John DeWitt. It included Oregon, Washington, all of California, and the southern half of Arizona. I'm not sure why they put the southern half of Arizona. The dividing line was US 60 Grand Avenue, Apache Boulevard, and Main Street in Mesa. Anybody that lived on the south side of that street had to go to the camp or had moved from that area. So there were some people that were living on the one side that had to move, and the people that lived on the north side didn't have to move. The street was just a dividing line. People say, well, why didn't you fight it? Well, there were 3 cases. Hirabayashi, Korematsu, and Matsui challenged it, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and that's when the decision was made that it was legal, it was constitutional because of wartime. As I indicated, there were 10 centers. Most of the people, because they were rushed, had to be placed in what they call assembly centers while the centers were being built. And the assembly centers usually, like in California where most of the Japanese Americans were, the assembly centers were the horse tracks, Tanforan, Santa Anita. They cleaned out the horse stalls, washed them down as best they could, and people were given duffel bags or cloth type bags where they would stuff them with straw so they could put their bedding, that would be their bedding. The camps themselves were in blocks, and each block had about 10 to 12 barracks, and each barrack was about 100 to 100 by 20, and each of those barracks were then divided into sections approximately 20 by 20. The barracks that I was in, I remember, was about 20 by 20, and there were 5 of us, myself, my brother, my sister, and my parents. And it was very, very bleak because all you could, they had one light bulb hanging from the ceiling and a stove in the center of the room. And the barracks were built with tar paper and green wood. So when the wood dried up during the summer in Arizona, cracks occurred. And people would try to stuff paper in there just to get some privacy. And when the wind blew, you know, when what do they call those now? The haboob? Yeah. When they came by, I remember we had to huddle in the corner because we thought the roof would be blown off. And one of the first people that had lunch at Poston said that the wind was so bad that he was in his barracks and he was eating a bologna sandwich. He couldn't eat it because the sand was all over it. Yeah. And as far as food goes, there were, each block had a mess hall, a recreation center, a laundry, a latrine, and I think that was it. But you'll see some pictures in there about the latrines. There was no partitions between the commodes, and an open shower, just a room full of showers. And the food that was rationed out, the food that was available, the amount that the government allowed was 48 cents per internee per month, or per day, excuse me. So that equates, I think, to about $6 and some odd cents a day. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe they had red meat maybe once a week. The people that lived in Gila River and Poston grew their own vegetables and had some chicken farms and I think some hog farms. But most of the time it was just food that was grown. One of the things that was interesting too, there was a loyalty act that the internees were asked to sign. And what it indicated was questions, I think 27 and 26, or 26 and 27, I believe. But one was, would you be willing to serve in the military of the United States? And the second question was, would you forswear any allegiance to the Emperor of Japan? Now, I don't know about you, but would you consider serving in the country that has imprisoned your family? I don't know. That was a good question to be answered. And the other one, if you forswear allegiance and you said yes, that meant you had allegiance, which you didn't have to begin with. So if you said no, then you were caught there too. So there were a bunch of people in the camps that signed no, and they were called the no boys, and they were imprisoned up in Tule Lake in the northern half of California, and that was where the so-called rabble-rousers were placed. One of the things that happened too was that even though some of them indicated that they would not serve in the military, a bunch of men, young men, volunteered and formed a 442nd Combat Regiment team. And they got the most awards for the unit of their size of any unit in the military. And posthumously, there were a lot of Medal of Honors given, because at that time they weren't giving Medal of Honors to anybody of Japanese ancestry, even though their heroism was the same as anybody else. And in 1980, President Jimmy Carter commissioned a commission on a commission on wartime internment of civilians. And what they found out after going through the United States and talking to all the people that were incarcerated, they came out with the conclusion that it was Executive Order 9066 was due to racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and lack of political leadership. Okay? And one of the things that's great about the country is that we can recognize that something was done that was improper. And so in 1988, there was a Civil Liberties Act of 1988, and it was signed by President Ronald Reagan. And in that letter, he indicated an apology from the United States and a token sum of $20,000 to each living internee. Okay, so $20,000 may seem like a lot, at the time, but you have to remember that the people that lost everything, the statistics shows that probably they got back maybe 3 cents on a dollar for everything that they lost. I think that's about it. We'll open it up to questions after the showing. And if you have any questions, you keep it in mind and we'll try to answer them. I know there's at least two, him and that lady in the back there was in the camp too. So they might have an answer if I don't have one. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.